Okay, so this is the Daf for May 11th, Sunday, 2025. This is Daf 10 of Shevuot. So, here we go. It says, and through this additional and, the goats of the festival are juxtaposed with the goats of the new moons, indicating that just as the goats of the new moons atone for a case involving sacrificial food, that is, where a ritually pure person partook of ritually impure sacrificial food, so too the goats of the festivals atone for a similar case involving sacrificial food, where a ritually impure person partook of ritually pure sacrificial food. And if you would say, let the goats of the festivals atone for that which the goats of the new moon are sacrificed, that is not possible. Didn't we say above that the verse states with regard to the goat of the new moon, and he gave it to you to bear the sin of the congregation, which indicates that it bears, that is, atones for that sin, but another does not bear that sin. And if you would say, let the goats of the festivals atone for that which the goat of Yom Kippur has brought, that is not possible. Didn't we say above that the verse states, with regard to the goat of Yom Kippur, Aaron shall bring atonement upon its corners once a year. Exodus 30, verse 10. The emphasis on once a year teaches that this atonement for this case should be only once a year. The Gemara explains, it must be that the goats of the festivals atoned for cases of defiling the temple or its sacrificial foods in which one did not have awareness, neither at the beginning nor at the end. Because if not, for what other matter involving sacrificial foods could they atone? If you say they atone for cases in which one had awareness at the beginning and had awareness at the end, then one can counter that he is liable to bring an offering to atone for his transgression, and therefore the goats of the festivals will not atone for him. If you say they atone for cases in which one had awareness at the beginning but did not have awareness at the end, then one can counter that the goat, whose blood presentation is performed inside the sanctuary and Yom Kippur itself, suspend any punishment that he deserves until he becomes aware of his transgression. If you say they atone for cases in which one did not have awareness at the beginning but did have awareness at the end, then one can counter that the goat whose blood presentation is performed outside the sanctuary atones. Perforce they atone only for cases in which one did not have awareness, neither at the beginning nor at the end. The Mishnah teaches that Rabbi Meir says, the atonement effected by all the goats offered as part of the additional offerings, that is those of the new moons, festivals, and Yom Kippur, is the same. They all atone for various cases of defiling the temple or its sacrificial foods. Rabbi Hama bar Rabbi Hanina said, what is the reasoning of Rabbi Meir? With regard to the goat of the festivals, Numbers 28 to 29, the verse could have simply stated a goat, but instead it states and a goat, which teaches that all the goats are juxtaposed, this one with that one, as the other of the term, as the use of the term and teaches that the second matter adds to the first matter, and that all the goats affect a similar atonement as the first one listed, that of the new moon. The Gemara questions this interpretation. Initially, it enters your mind to explain that the atonement affected by each and every one of the goats of the festivals is derived from the atonement affected by the goat adjacent to it. That is the one mentioned in the passage immediately preceding it. The atonement affected by the Passover goat from the atonement affected by the Passover goat from the atonement affected by the goat of the new moon, and the atonement affected by the Shavuot goat from the atonement affected by the Passover goat, and so forth. But this is difficult, as doesn't Rabbi Yochanan say with regard to the entire Torah, one derives a halacha derived via juxtaposition from a halacha derived via juxtaposition, except for halachot concerning consecrated matters. So where one does not derive a halacha derived via juxtaposition from a halacha derived via a juxtaposition. The Gemara answers, this is not difficult because actually, atonement affected by all the goats is derived directly from the atonement affected by the first goat, that is the goat of the new moon. The Gemara asked, Rabbi Hama bar Rabbi Hanina's explanation works out well for all the goats with regard to which it is written, quote, and a goat. But from where do we derive what the goats of Shavuot and Yom Kippur atone for, as with regard to them it is not written, and a goat, but simply a goat? Rather, Rabbi Yonah says, the verse states at the end of the passage detailing the goats of the festivals, quote, these shall you offer to the Lord on your festivals, Numbers 29:39. With this verse, all the goats of the festivals are juxtaposed, this one with that one, which indicates that they all atone for the same sins. The Gemara challenges, but the new moon is not regarded as a festival. The Gemara refutes this. In truth, the new moon is also called a festival. In accordance with what Abaye says with regard to a different issue, as Abaye says with regard to the month of Tammuz, in that year during which the Jewish people sinned by accepting the slanderous report of the spies about Eretz Yisrael, the court made it a full month of 30 days, as it is written, quote, he proclaimed a festival to crush my young men, Lamentations 1:15. Abaye understands the verse to mean that by extending the month of Tammuz by an extra day, by proclaiming that the 30th day should be celebrated as a new moon in addition to the first day of the full month, it emerged that the acceptance of the spy's report occurred on the 9th of Av and not the 8th, thereby defining the 9th of Av as an ominous day for the Jewish people. From Abaye's explanation, it is apparent that the new moon is also called a festival. The Gemara continues to analyze Rabbi Meir's opinion. Rabbi Yochanan says, and even though he holds that all the goats offered as part of the additional offering affect atonement for the same sin, Rabbi Meir concedes with regard to the goat whose blood presentation is performed inside the sanctuary on Yom Kippur that it does not atone for their atonement. That is, does not atone for the sins that they atone for, and they do not atone for its atonement. He elaborates, it does not atone their atonement because, as the Gemara derived from the verse, quote, Aaron shall bring atonement upon its corners once a year. Exodus 30, verse 10. The internal goat affects one atonement for only one case, but cannot affect two atonements for two different cases. And they do not atone its atonement because, as the Gemara explained, the verse states, quote, Aaron shall bring atonement upon its corners once a year. The emphasis on the phrase once a year teaches that this atonement for the specific case that it atones for should be only once a year. The Gemara adds, this qualification of Rabbi Meir's opinion is also indicated by that which is taught in a Braita for cases of the defiling of the temple in which one did not have awareness, neither at the beginning nor at the end, and for cases in which one did not have awareness at the beginning but did have awareness at the end, and for a ritually pure person who partook of ritually impure sacrificial food, the goats of the festivals and the goats of the new moons, and the goat whose blood presentation is performed outside the sanctuary atone. This is the statement of Rabbi Meir. The Gemara notes, but in delineating which offerings atone, Rabbi Meir omitted the goat whose blood presentation is performed inside the sanctuary, and furthermore he delineated their atonement, that is, what cases they atone for. He also omitted, that is, did not mention, the cases that the internal goat atones for, which are the cases in which one had awareness at the beginning but did not have awareness at the end. Evidently, the atonement of the internal goat is subsequently different from the atonement of the other goats. The Mishnah teaches, Rabbi Shimon would say, the goats of the new moons atone for a ritually pure person who unwittingly partook of ritually impure sacrificial food, and for defiling the temple or its sacrificial foods. The goats of the festivals atone for cases in which one did not have awareness, neither at the beginning nor at the end, and the goats of the additional offerings of Yom Kippur atone for cases in which one did not have awareness at the beginning, but did have awareness at the end. The Gemara challenges, Granted, the goats of the new moon do not atone for that which the goats of the festival atone. As the verse states with regard to the goat of the new moon, quote, and he gave it to you to bear the sin of the congregation, Leviticus 10:17, which indicates that it bears or atones for one sin but does not bear two sins. But nevertheless, let the goats of the festivals atone for that which the goats of the new moons atone. The Gemara responds, the verse states, quote, he gave it to you. The emphasis on it teaches that it bears this sin, but no other offering bears this sin. The Gemara challenges, granted, the goats of the festivals do not atone for that which the goats of Yom Kippur atone. As the verse states with regard to the goat of Yom Kippur, quote, Aaron shall bring atonement upon its corners once a year. So Exodus 30, verse 10. The emphasis on the phrase once a year teaches that this atonement, that is the specific case it atones for, should be only once a year, but nevertheless let the goats of Yom Kippur atone for that which the goats of the festivals atone. So the Gemara responds, the verse states once a year, which indicates that it affects one atonement only for one case, but cannot affect two atonements for two different cases. The Gemara challenges the use of these derivations, but when it states once in this verse, it is with regard to the goat whose blood presentation is performed inside the sanctuary, that it is written, so the derivations from it should have no bearing on the discussion concerning the external goat. So the Gemara answers, the verse states, one goat for a sin offering aside from the sin offering of the atonements. Numbers 29:11. One goat for a sin offering is referring to the external goat, and the sin offering of the atonements is referring to the internal goat. With this verse, the external goat is juxtaposed with the internal goat, and therefore the limitations imposed on the atonement of the internal goat are also to be applied to the external goat. The Mishnah teaches, Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda says in the name of Rabbi Shimon, a version of this opinion that differs from that of the Mishnah above. So the goats of the new moons atone for a ritually pure person who unwittingly partook of ritually impure sacrificial food. The goats of the festivals exceed them as they atone both for a ritually pure person who partook of ritually impure sacrificial food and also atone for cases of defiling the temple or sacrificial foods where one did not have awareness, neither at the beginning nor at the end. the goats of Yom Kippur further exceed them, as they atone both for a ritually pure person who partook of ritually impure sacrificial food, and for cases of defiling the temple, and for sacrificial foods in which one did not have awareness, neither at the beginning nor at the end. And they also atone for cases in which one did not have awareness at the beginning, but did have awareness at the end. You see how it's like building. Like it's this category, and then the next one, it includes the one before it. So, and then the other one includes the ones before it. So the Gemara asks, what is different about the goats of the new moons that they do not atone for that which the goats of the festivals atone? The Gemara answers, as the verse states with regard to any one of the goats of the new moons, quote, and he gave it to you to bear the sin of the congregation, Leviticus 10:17, which teaches that it bears or atones for one sin but does not bear two sins. The Gemara asks, if so, the goats of the festivals should also not atone for that which the goats of the new moon atone. As that same verse states, quote, and he gave it to you, which indicates that it bears or atones for that sin, but nothing else bears that sin. Why then does Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda cite Rabbi Shimon as holding that the goats of the festivals do atone for that which the goats of the new moons atone? The Gemara answers, Rabbi Shimon does not learn anything from the word it. Accordingly, he holds that any of the goats of the festivals can atone for two different sins. The Gemara asks further, what is different about the goats of the festivals that they do not atone for that which the goats of Yom Kippur atone? As the verse states with regard to the goat of Yom Kippur, quote, once a year, Exodus 30, verse 10, which teaches that this atonement for the specific case that it atones for should be only once a year, and therefore no other offering can atone for it. The Gemara challenges, if so, the goats of Yom Kippur should also not atone for that which the goats of the festivals atone, as it is written, quote, once a year, which teaches that the goats affect one atonement for only one case, but cannot affect two atonements for two cases. Why then does Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda cite Rabbi Shimon as holding that the goats of Yom Kippur atone for everything that the goats of the festivals atone for? The Gemara answers, Rabbi Shimon does not learn anything from the word once. So accordingly, he holds that the goats of Yom Kippur can atone for three different cases. The Gemara asked, why doesn't he expound the word once? He does not expound it because when the word once is written, it is written with regard to the goat whose blood presentation is performed inside the sanctuary, and so the halacha derived from that verse has no bearing on the capacity of the goat whose blood presentation is performed outside the sanctuary to atone. The Gemara asked, if so, the goats of the festivals also should atone for that which the goats of Yom Kippur atone, as when the phrase once a year is written, it is written with regard to the goat whose blood presentation is performed inside the sanctuary, so the halacha derived from that verse has no bearing on whether another offering can atone for that which the external goat atones. The Gemara answers, actually, he does learn halacha from the word once, and he holds that it also teaches about the capacity of the external goat to atone, as the Gemara explained above, but it is different here with regard to the derivation that the goat cannot effect two atonements, as the verse states, quote, and Aaron shall bring atonement upon its corners once a year, Exodus 30, verse 10. The emphasis upon its corners teaches that it is only with regard to the internal goat whose blood presentation is performed upon the corners of the internal altar that it affects one atonement for only one case, but cannot affect two atonements for two different cases. But the external goat whose blood presentation is performed upon the corners of the external altar can affect even two different atonements. The animals purchased with funds collected for public offerings may be sacrificed only during the fiscal year in which those funds were given. For this purpose, the fiscal year begins on the 1st of Nisan. Generally, once an animal has been consecrated as an offering, then even if for some reason it may no longer be sacrificed, it still cannot be redeemed unless it develops a blemish. So Rabbi Yochanan teaches an exception to this halacha. Ula says that Rabbi Yochanan says, lambs consecrated for the daily offerings that were not needed by the public during the fiscal year in which they were purchased are redeemed, even if they are unblemished, and they may then be used for non-sacred purposes. Rabbah was sitting and reciting this halacha. Rav Chisda said to him, who will listen to you and Rabbi Yochanan, your teacher, with regard to this halacha? Rav Chisda clarified, but the sanctity that was inherent in them, to where has it gone? Since these animals were consecrated as offerings, they should have been endowed with inherent sanctity. Only sanctity that inheres in an item's value, that is, an item consecrated to the temple treasury, can be desacralized through redemption, but an item with inherent sanctity can never be desacralized. Rabbah said to him, don't you also hold that we do not say that the question The sanctity that has inherent in them, to where has it gone, poses a difficulty. But didn't we learn in the Mishnah, so Shekalim 4:5, Parak 4, verse 5, in any fiscal year, one may use only incense that was purchased with funds collected for that year. Accordingly, the Mishnah asks, with regard to the surplus incense that remained unused at the end of the fiscal year, what would the temple treasurers do with it in order to render it usable for the following year? They would separate from the temple treasury the wages for the artisans who worked for the temple and whose funds would thereby be desacralized. And then they would desacralize the surplus incense by transferring its sanctity to that money that had been set aside for the artisans. Then they would give the now desacralized incense to the artisans as their wages. And finally, they would repurchase it with funds from the new collection carried out for the coming year. Rabbah explains the proof from the Mishnah. One could ask, but why should the method described work? Let us say the sanctity that was inherent in the incense, to where has it gone? It cannot be removed by redeeming it. Perforce, even you must concede that this question does not pose a difficulty. Rav Chisda said to him, do you say that there is a proof from the halachot of incense? One cannot compare incense to animals consecrated for daily offerings, since incense is different. And that is the end of 10. So, thanks for watching.